Okay, so we're starting Hilchos Tefillah in the Shagas Aryeh. We're starting with Siman Yudalid, and the Shagas Aryeh discusses a very famous machlokus, which is a machlokus between the Rambam and the Ramban, whether Tefillah is a mitzvah d'oraisa or a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. So we'll start with seeing the sheet of the Rambam inside, and that's the first Maramakom, which is the first Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah. And over there the Rambam says, Misas aseh l'espal b'chol yom, shenemar v'avadatem es Hashem Elokechem. There's a mitzvah saseh to daven every day, as the pasuk says that you should serve Hashem. Mipi Shmuel lamdu, we learn from the Shmuel. In other words, you have a Kabbalah. Sha'avoda zu hi tefillah. This avoda that refers to in this pasuk, which we say in the Kriya Shema, is referring to davening. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, ula avdo b'chol vavchem, that you should serve HaKadosh Baruch with your whole heart. And this is the part which is in Kriya Shema. Amru Chacham, the Chacham say, Izuhi avoda shebelieve. What is the avoda in the heart? Zu tefillah. That refers to davening. The ein minyan tefillos min Torah, the number of tefillos, so is that which we daven 3 times a day, that's not d'oraisa. The ein mishnah tefillah hazos min Torah, and the mishnah of the tefillah, which seems to be the nusach. In other words, the words that we use to daven, that which we have, the specific wording of Shemona Esrei, that's also not min HaTorah. Ve'in l'tefillah zman kavu min HaTorah, and there's no special time to daven min HaTorah. So you could daven once a day. It seems clear from the Rambam, right? No time, it doesn't have to be during the day specifically, as opposed to the night. As long as one time during the day you say some tefillah, it doesn't matter what the wording is necessarily. So then you could be yotzei tefillah d'oraisa. That's the shita of the Rambam. Now, to discuss this drasha of la'avdo b'chol avavchem, and from there we understand that the Torah refers to tefillah as the avoda. So that's taken from a Gemara in Tainus, which is the second Maramakom, the first half of Tainus. The Gemara there says, Tanya, the Brisa says, la'ava es Hashem Elokechem, to love Hashem, ula'avdo, and to serve Him, b'chol avavchem, with your heart. Ezuhi avoda shehi believe, and what type of avoda is in the heart? Havi omer zu tefillah. That is tefillah. So you see, it seems like the Rambam is well sourced in the Gemara to understand that the Torah itself refers to a mitzvah of davening. However, as we've seen constantly in the Sefer Shagas Aryeh, that not always when the Gemara brings a drasha is that a proof that something is d'oraisa. We could always say it's an asmachta ba'alma, that it's really a d'Rabbanan, and the pasuk they're just using as a hint to the din d'Rabbanan. And therefore, as we pointed out, you almost never have a clear proof that something is d'oraisa from the fact that the Gemara learns it out from a pasuk. But on the surface, it would seem like the opinion of the Rambam. The Shagas Aryeh asks a question from the Gemara in Brachos Daf Yudalad Amud Beis, which is the third Maramakom, and the Gemara there says, and I think we've seen this Gemara before, that Rabbi Shimon Yochai Omer, B'dinhu sheyakdim Shema levahayim Shemoah, that it would make sense to say Shema before v'hayim Shemoah, which is what we do, right? This makes sense the way we do it. Shezel lilmo v'zel lamid, because Kriya Shema speaks about learning, and v'hayim Shemoah speaks about teaching. V'hayim Shemoah v'yomer, and v'hayim Shemoah should come before v'yomer, shezel lilmod, v'zeh lasos, or should say lamid, that this one, Vahaya, is speaking about teaching Torah, and Vayum refers to doing the mitzvahs. And the Gemara asks, Atu Shema lilmod ispe lilamid v'lasos laspe, does the parak of Shema only have learning? It doesn't speak about teaching and doing. Paksiv, but the pasuk writes, Vishinantem, that you should teach it to your children. Ukshartem, and you should tie the tefillin on. Uksavtem, and you should write the mezuzahs. Visu, and furthermore, V'hayim Shemoah lilamid hu de'isbe v'lasos lasbe. Does V'hayim Shemoah only speak about teaching? It doesn't speak about doing mitzvos. V'aksiv, the pasuk writes, Ukshartem, you have to tie the tefillin, Uksavtem, and write the mezuzos. El hachi kamer. So rather we understand what Shimon Yochai says is B'din hu shetakdim Shema V'hayim Shemoah shezel lilmod ulilamid v'lasos. The first parak of Shema has all 3. V'hayim Shemoah livayomer shezeh yish b'lilamid Vilasos, Vayumer, Imba El Lasos Bilvat. And the second paragraph of Vahaya has 2, it has teaching and doing. The third paragraph of Vayumer only has doing, and therefore that's why we have it in that order. But the important part that we need for our topic at hand is just one of the middle lines here where it said, V'hayim Shemoah l'lamid hu disbei lasus lasbei. V'hayim Shemoah doesn't have doing. V'haksiv, the pasuk writes, ukshartem uchsavtem. So what mitzvos do we find in the parak of V'hayim Shemoah? According to the Gemara, it seems that the mitzvos that we find are tefillin and mezuzah. Now, the second paragraph of Kriya Shema has also the pasuk that we quoted above of la'avdo b'chol levavchem, which is tefillah, which also is a mitzvah. How come the Gemara doesn't mention the mitzvah of tefillah, which is earlier in the parak of V'hayim Shema, and instead only speaks about the mitzvos of tefillin and mezuzah? It would seem from here that we don't really understand that la'avdo b'chol levavchem is actually a mitzvah of tefillah. Right, maybe we used it as an asmachta, but that's not actually the pashup pshat of that pasuk, and therefore that would be a question against the Rambam. However, we can answer this question, says the Shagged by explaining that when the Gemara is looking for a la'asos, it's not just looking for any mitzvah, it's looking for a mitzvah that has an action to it. Tefillah, it may be a mitzvah, but since it's done b'dibur, something that you speak, you don't do anything, therefore that wouldn't be included in the lasos that the Gemara is looking for. So therefore we don't have a raya from this Gemara that the words ulavdo b'chol levavchem is not referring to a mitzvah of tefillah. So that's the sheet of the Rambam. We have the sheet of the Ramban, and the Ramban is brought in the Sefer HaMitzvos, and he says that tefillah is only d'Rabbanan. Right? There is no mitzvah of tefillah d'oraisa. The whole thing's only d'Rabbanan. Basically, we're going to go through many rayas to the sheet of the Ramban. Some of them are brought by the Ramban himself. And we have 2 from the Ramban himself, 3 from the Shagged Aryeh, and then we'll follow up with a couple questions against the Rambam. Other questions. Okay. So one raya of the Ramban is from the Gemara in Barachos Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, which is the 4th Maramako. It says, Balkari, this is a Mishnah, we've seen this also a few times I think already. Balkari mahar belibo, ve'inu mavarich lo lefanev v'la'achreha. A Balkari, he thinks Kriya Shema. So Mishnah is referring to speaking about Kriya Shema. He thinks Kriya Shema in his mind. He doesn't speak it. And he doesn't make the brachos at all. The brachos before and after Kriya Shema. Val hamazon mavarich la'achra ve'inu mavarich lefanav. Benching, he benches after he eats, but he doesn't make a bracha before he eats. And Yehuda Omer Mavarich Lefneim La'achreim, Yehuda says you do make the brachas. Okay, so the Gemara explains, right, why is it that you think Kriya Shema, but not Tefillah? Or firstly, Gemara wants to know why do you thinking Kriya Shema? And we say it's because the tzibur is osek in that. And then the Gemara continues, and it's just skipping down to that next snip from the Gemara, which is from later on, is v'harei tefillah dedavar shat tzibur oskin bo. Tefillah is something that the tzibur is doing. Utnan, but the Mishnah says hayomi tefillah v'niskashu balkari. If a person is in the middle of davening and he remembers he's a balkari, lo yafsek el yikat, so he shouldn't stop in the middle of davening. He should just make his davening shorter. Time it askal, and it's clear from that Mishnah that we're only allowing him to shorten his tefillah because he already started davening. Hello askal, had he not started to daven, lo yaskal, he's not allowed to start davening at all. So you see that davening is different than Kriya Shema. And the Gemara explains, Shani tefillah, delesba malchus shemayim. That tefillah is different because it doesn't have malchus shemayim the way Kriya Shema has. And the Gemara asks, right, berachas hamazon la'acharav, delesba malchus shemayim, utnan al mazon v'varach la'acharav ve'nu v'varach l'fanav. But berachas hamazon that doesn't have malchus shemayim, we do allow the balkari to say that, or at least to think it. And the Gemara answers, Ela Kriya Shema u'berachas hamazon d'oraisa u'tefillah d'Rabbanan. That berachas hamazon and Kriya Shema are d'oraisa. Tefillah is only d'Rabbanan. Right? So we see clearly the Gemara itself says that tefillah is only a d'Rabbanan. Now, the Kesef Mishnah, he tries to answer this question of the Ramban, and he has 3 possible. That's good. 3 answers are going to be later. He has an answer to this question. He tries to answer by saying that when the Gemara says that tefillah is derabanan, what it means is that the tefillah that we know of, meaning the nusach of Shmona Esrei, is derabanan, and therefore the Balkari can't think that. But of course, a tefillah, right, one tefillah a day is d'oraisa, and the Balkari will have to be maharher in some sort of tefillah. He's just not going to say the entire Shmona Esrei. So that's the answer of the Kesef Mishnah. The Shagas Aryeh questions this answer. He has a few questions. One question is that if that's the case, the Mishnah should have said so, or the Gemara should have said so. The Gemara is discussing tefillah, and it seems to understand that he doesn't daven. Had we just gone with the Pasha understanding the Gemara, a Balkari wouldn't daven at all, which would be a terrible mistake according to the Kesef Mishnah, because he does have to daven. He just very specifically doesn't say or doesn't think through the entire nusach of the Shmona Esrei. The Gemara should have said that. The way the Gemara says it is misleading, at least according to the way the Kesef Mishnah understood, and would seem to imply that he doesn't daven at all. That's one issue. Second issue is that by Kriya Shema, we also have parts of Kriya Shema are d'oraisa, and parts of Kriya Shema are derabanan. As we spoke about in, way back when we started this year, I think the first year that we had on Kriya Shema, whether it's d'oraisa or derabanan. So the first paragraph is d'oraisa. The third paragraph is d'oraisa in as much as you have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. But you don't have to do it with that nusach of the third paragraph of Kriya Shema, at least on a d'oraisa level. So there is a part of Kriya Shema which is d'oraisa, means they have to say the first paragraph, and they have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. Nevertheless, the Balkari is going to think through the entire Kriya Shema, all three paragraphs. That's the pashtus of the Gemara. Tefillah is basically the same thing as Kriya Shema. There's part of it which is d'oraisa. I have to do some sort of tefillah. The entire nusach is d'rabanan, right? So the thing is Kriya Shema. Part of it's d'oraisa. The whole nusach is d'rabanan. So by Kriya Shema, and nevertheless the Gemara makes this chiluk. Kriya Shema is d'oraisa. He does do it. And what does that mean? We have to understand what that means. Is part of Kriya Shema is d'oraisa, and therefore the Balkari does the entire Kriya Shema, even parts which are only d'rabanan, as opposed to tefillah means that tefillah is completely d'rabanan. You can't answer that there is a part of tefillah which is d'oraisa, but the entire nusach is d'rabanan, because that would be so. So let it be the same as Kriya Shema, and the Balkari would say it as well. And he points out the same thing applies by Berachas Hamazon. Berachas Hamazon also is part d'oraisa, part d'rabanan. The first three brachos are d'oraisa, and the fourth bracha is d'rabanan. And even within the first three brachos, d'oraisa you have to say three brachos, but the nusach that we have, right, all of the words that we say as part of the first three brachos of Berachas Hamazon are not all d'oraisa. You can use the d'oraisa with perhaps a shorter nusach or a different nusach. So therefore, Berachas Hamazon also has the same quality of the ikar mitzvah is d'oraisa, but what you're saying, the nusach you're saying is only a d'rabanan. Right? So therefore, we see clearly from here that tefillah doesn't have this aspect at all, because there is no tefillah d'oraisa. That's what it seems to be from the Gemara. We have a second raya for the sheet of the Ramban. So it comes out the Shagas Aryeh agrees that this Gemara seems to be a clear proof to the Ramban, not like the way that the Kesef Mishnah answered. A second proof to the Ramban is the Gemara in Sukkah Daf Lamed Ches, and there the Gemara says as follows. It's the fifth Ma'ar Makom. Mishuva b'derech. If a person is coming from the road, below haybiyaru lulav litol, he doesn't have a lulav. L'kishi kanis lebeso yital shulchano. So when he comes home, he should take it on his table. Lo natal shachris yital bin arbayim. If he didn't take lulav in the morning, he could do it in the afternoon. Shekol hayom kasher lulav. You could do lulav the entire day. Amarta. Now we said in the Mishnah, no lulav shulchano, that you take the lulav. He takes the lulav on his table. What does that mean, on his table? Lememra comes to teach us the mafsik, that he has to stop eating. If he started eating, he forgot that he didn't do lulav yet, and he started eating after he got home, he has to stop in the middle of his meal in order to take the lulav. V'ra minhi will ask a steer to this. It says, im hischilu in mafsikin. That's part of the Mishnah in Masechah Shabbos, which speaks about the things that you're not allowed to do before davening mincha. One of them is to eat a meal. And it says over there, if you started the meal, you weren't supposed to start eating before you davened. But if you did begin eating, you do not have to stop eating in order to daven. Amar Rav Safra, and Rav Safra explains, Lo kasha, it's not difficult. Hada ikashos biyom, hada lekashos biyom. It depends whether you have enough time to do the mitzvah. If your meal is going to take you until the end of the Zman, and you're not going to be able to do lulav afterwards, so you have to stop in the middle. As opposed to the Mishnah in Masechah Shabbos is referring to a situation where you'll finish your meal and you'll still have time to daven afterwards, so then you don't have to stop in the middle of your meal. Amar Rava, and Rava says about this, my kushya, what was the original question? The original question doesn't make sense. Dilma had yaraisa had rabbanan. Maybe one is diraisa and one is dirabanan. Meaning, lulav is diraisa. That's why I have to stop my meal in order to do the mitzvah diraisa. Davening is only dirabanan. Since it's only dirabanan, I don't have to stop in the middle of the meal. So again, clearly the Gemara again says very clearly that tefillah is only a dirabanan. So on this, the Kesef Mishnah gives three answers. One answer is we're talking about a situation where he already davened that day, and therefore this davening that he's about to say now, right, that we're discussing, whether he has to stop his meal to daven or not, is completely derabanan. You only have to daven, as we said, according to the Rambam. On a dioraisa level, you only have to daven once a day. So he already davened, let's say, shachris. Now it's time for a mincha, and he started eating. So this tefillah that we're discussing right now about whether he has to stop his meal in order to daven it or not is completely a derabanan, even according to the Rambam. Therefore, it wouldn't be a proof to the Ramban. And the Shagas Aryeh likes this answer, especially as he points out that it's clear from the Gemara and the Mishnah in Shabbos, we're talking about mincha. Right? A person that's holding by mincha time most probably has already davened shachris. Right? Not necessarily. We could be talking about someone that missed shachris. Right? But the pashtus would work out according to the answer of the Kesef Mishnah. We could very easily explain that we're talking about a person that davened shachris, and now it's just a question about whether he has to stop eating in order to daven mincha. That's one answer to the Kesef Mishnah. Another answer to the Kesef Mishnah is that he's going to have time to daven afterwards anyway, to which the Shagas Aryeh says he doesn't really understand, right? That itself was built into the Gemara, right? We're talking about a case where he maybe has time after, maybe he doesn't have time after. The Gemara itself is making that chiluk, and Rav is saying, no, without that chiluk, there's a difference between lulav and tefillah, and that is that tefillah is only derabanan. Doesn't seem like it has to do with whether he's going to have time afterwards or not. That's what it seems from the Gemara. A third answer, so therefore the second answer to the Kesef Mishnah the Shagas Aryeh doesn't like. Third answer of the Shagas Aryeh is that he could say a very quick tefillah. He doesn't have to stop his meal. Right? He could just say a very quick tefillah in the middle, and he'll be yotzei d'oraisa. The reason he would have to stop his meal in order to daven would only be to be mekayim the mitzvah of tefillah d'Rabbanan to say an entire Shemona Esrei. That's the third answer to the Kesef Mishnah, and the Shagas Aryeh doesn't like this answer, basically the same as what he said in the previous sugya, that he didn't like the answer to the Kesef Mishnah because the Gemara should have said that he has to at least say a short tefillah. Seems from the Gemara, the pashas of the Gemara is he doesn't have to daven at all, if it's a derabanan, the way Rava was setting it up. So it ends up this proof of the Ramban. We have three answers to it from the Kesef Mishnah. The Shagas Aryeh does agree with one of the answers to the Kesef Mishnah, so he would say that this proof is not conclusive. A third proof of the Ramban, is from the Gemara in Brachos Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. You quoted Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph before, but this is a different sugi there, which is in the 6th Ma'ar Makom, and it says over there, we've seen this many times in our discussion of Hilchas Kriya Shema, that Rabbi Elazar says, Safik Kara Kriya Shema, Safik Lo Kara. If a person has a Safik whether he said Kriya Shema or not, Chozer V'Kari Kriya Shema, he has to say Kriya Shema again. Safik Ispal, Safik Lo Ispal. If he has a Safik whether he davened or not, Eino Chozer Ispal, he doesn't have to daven again. Rabbi Yochanan says, Ulavaish Ispal Adam Kol Yom Kulo, that even a Safik of davening you have to daven again because there's no problem to just daven all day. So, what's Rabbi Elazar's shita? Rabbi Elazar's shita is Safik Kriya Shema, you do have to say again, because it's a Safik D'Oraisa L'Chumra. Safik davening, you don't have to say again, because it's a Safik D'Rabbanan. So again, we see from this Gemara that tefillah is only a D'Rabbanan. Again, the Kesef Mishnah wants to answer that we're talking about a case where he already davened once that day. Now we're talking about a second tefillah. Right? For example, it's he davened Ma'ariv, and now we're talking about Shachris. Or he davened Shachris, and now we're talking about Mincha. So since he already davened this day, so this tefillah that we have a suffix, whether you should daven or not, is completely a Safek Durabanan, even according to the Rambam. And therefore we wouldn't have a question against the Rambam from this Gemara. However, the Shagas Aryeh disagrees with this answer of the Kesef Mishnah, and he explains that we're comparing Kriya Shema to Tefillah. So just like by Kriya Shema, the case where he has a suffix whether he was Yotzei Kriya Shema or not, that he has to repeat Kriya Shema, is talking about a situation where he has a suffix whether he said Kriya Shema at all. Obviously, if he said Kriya Shema once, or he said the Diraisa level of Kriya Shema, and then he just has a suffix of a Dirabanan Kriya Shema or something like that, if there would be such a thing, so then you wouldn't say suffix Diraisa L'chumra, and he would not have to say Kriya Shema again. Obviously, Rabbi Elazar is talking about a situation where there's a suffix whether he didn't say Kriya Shema at all. And he's comparing that to davening. So what's the comparison? The comparison is a case where he has a suffix whether he davened at all. If he already davened once, so then of course he doesn't have to daven again. But here we're talking about a case he maybe didn't daven at all. If he didn't daven at all, so according to the Rambam, that would be a suffix Yiraisa, and he should have to daven again. But Rabbi Elazar says that he doesn't. So therefore, the Shagas Aryeh here as well sides with the Ramban on this proof and says that this is a sufficient proof for the Shita of the Ramban. Okay, so those were three proofs, not two like I mentioned in the Akdama, three proofs that the Ramban himself brought to his Shita, two of which the Shagas Aryeh is on board with. Right? Two conclusive proofs to the Shita of the Ramban. Now the Shagas Aryeh attempts some other proofs to the Shita of the Ramban. One is from the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, and there it says, Tanya, Chaverim shal yoskin b'Torah, mafsikin l'Kriya Shema, ve'in mafsikin l'Tefillah. If people are learning Torah, they have to stop learning in order to say Kriya Shema, but they do not have to stop in order to daven. Amar Rav Yochanan says, Lo shanu ella kagon Rav Shimon Yochai v'Chavirav. That's only for Rav Shimon Yochai and his people. Shetoras and Unasa that would only learn. Havakon anu, but regular people mafsikin Kriya Shema ula Tefillah, they stop learning even to daven. So we see from this Gemara, right, very similar to the other proofs that we had, that there's a difference between Kriya Shema and Tefillah. What is the difference? The difference is, according to Rashi at least, Kriya Shema is Diraisa, and Tefillah is Durabanan. Right, so again, we see over here that Tefillah is only Durabanan. That's another proof to the Shita of the Ramban. A fifth proof to the Ramban, this again is brought by the Shagas Aryeh, not the Ramban himself, is from the Mishnah in Brachos, Daf Chaf. The Mishnah there says, it's from the Gemara actually on the Mishnah, but the Mishnah says, Nashim va'avadim uketanim b'tur mikriya shema u'minat tefillin v'chayavim b'tefillah u'mezuzah u'virchas hamazon. Women and slaves in ketanim, they are part from Kriya Shema and from tefillin, but they're chayiv to daven. They're chayiv mezuzah and they're chayiv birchas hamazon. The Gemara goes through to explain each one why they are chayiv or potter. When it comes to tefillah, chayim b'tefillah, the Gemara says, derachmin inhu. The reason why they're chayiv to daven is because it's bakashas rachamim, and therefore it makes sense that they should daven. It's a svara. They, need to ask HaKadosh Baruch over their needs just like men do. Ma'odatem, I would have thought, holuk sivba erev vavoker v'tzarayim. Since the pasuk says that it's something which is done in the evening and in the morning and in the afternoon, right, which seems to be a reference to the way we daven, Maariv, Shachris, and Mincha, Kimitzvah Sasesha Zman Grama Davi. Therefore, it's a Mitzvah Sasesha Zman Grama, because there's specific times to daven, in which case women would be potter. Kamash Malan. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that, in fact, women are chayiv. Now, how do we understand this Gemara? According to the Ramban, the Gemara makes sense, because Tefillah is a Durabanan, and the Durabanan includes specific times when you daven. Therefore, it would be a mitzvah Sasesha Zman Grama. Right? It's a mitzvah the Chazal were masakin based on time, and women should be potter, except for the fact that there's a svara, since they have to ask for rachmim from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so then they do have to daven. That's how we would understand the Gemara according to the Ramban. But according to the Rambam, how do we understand the Gemara? Why do I need this reason of rachmin inhu? According to the Rambam, you have to daven one tefillah, and there's no time set for that davening. And therefore, on a dioraisa level, women are chayiv to daven. Right? It's not a mitzvah saseh shezman grama, it's a mitzvah saseh that doesn't have a special time. The Rabbanan were masakin when to daven and how to daven. So when you add on the details that are Durabanan, it becomes a time-bound mitzvah. But that's not going to take away the chiyuv of the women, dioraisa to daven. It's not going to turn it into a mitzvah zman grama that women are potter. Chazal didn't come along to try to take away the mitzvah of tefillah from women by turning it into a time-bound mitzvah. They took the mitzvah which women are chayiv in, and they were masaking the details when to do it. Right? So it turned into zman grama, but not a type of zman grama that's going to make women potter from davening. If on a dioraisa level they were chayiv to daven, so therefore, why does the Gemara have to say that the reason is because it's rachamim? Seems to be a proof against the Rambam. So the Shagas Aryeh leaves it at that, but I think there's what to discuss about this Gemara that it's really not so clear that this Gemara is like the Ramban and not like the Rambam. The whole Gemara is a little bit difficult. Firstly, I skipped something, that the Shagas Aryeh does give an answer for the Rambam. The Shagas Aryeh says that the discussion of the Gemara, when it says Chayiv b'tefillah, you could understand what it means is they're Chayiv in the 3 tefillas a day, Durabanan. In other words, of course, D'oraisa they have to daven once a day. Right? That's not a question. Of course they have to daven once a day according to the Rambam, because it's not Zman Grama. Right? Something that applies the entire day, night and day. The Gemara wants to know, do women have to daven the way we daven? Do they have to daven the tefillas of Shemona Esrei 3 times a day? Now that you would think they don't have to do, because that part of tefillah is Zman Grama. And on that we say, since it's Rachamim, then they do have to daven the 3 tefillas. You could explain the Gemara that way according to the Rambam. However, I think it's very difficult to explain the Gemara that way according to the Rambam, because the Rambam says, in Halacha Beis, and I don't have it quoted on the Mareh Makomos, but the Rambam says, after he says Halacha Aleph, which is to explain this idea that there's a chiyuv min haTorah without a zman kavua to daven, he then says, Lefikach nashim v'avadim chayavin b'tefillah, that's why women and avadim are chayiv, lefi mitzvah saseh shel zman grama, because it's a mitzvah saseh shel zman grama. Right, so it sounds like he's explaining this is why women are chayiv. So he's bringing the Gemara, I mean, it's always unclear from the Rambam, because the Rambam never quotes his sources, but it seems like the Rambam is discussing this idea that women and avadim are chayiv in tefillah, and the reason for it, the Rambam does not say is because of rachamin inhu, which is what the Gemara says. Rather, he says because it's mitzvah saseh shelo hazman grama, which fits very well with the shita of the Rambam. Now, the truth is the whole Gemara, I think, is a little bit difficult. It lends itself to question if there's maybe a problem with the nusach, with the girsa that we have in the Gemara. Why is that? So a couple of reasons. Number one is the Gemara isn't set up the way we would expect the Gemara to be set up according to the way we have it written. The way we have it written, it sounds like there's a havamina that tefillah is a mitzvah saseh shel zman grama, and therefore women are potter. But since it's rachamim, therefore they're chayiv. Right? That's the way we read the Gemara. If so, the Gemara really should have been written differently. The way we would normally say such a Gemara is that they're chayiv in tefillah. Mahu detim, I would have thought, right? Since it says this pasuk in Tehillim of Erevok v'tzarayim, therefore it's mitzvah saseh shel zman grama. Kamash malan derachamim inhu, or the reason why they're chayiv is because it's rachamim. First, it's giving the reason why they're chayiv, and then explaining what you would have thought without the reason. It's just a strange order of the Gemara. That's number one. And number two is that the Havamina itself of the Gemara of Erev Avok v'Tzarayim is quite difficult because it doesn't really seem to fit in with any explanation. If we would say Tefillah is D'oraisa like the Rambam, so then I would think that the pasuk in Tehillim, right? It's the pasuk in Tehillim, not in the Torah, which says Erev Avok v'Tzarayim. I would think that is telling me that the mitzvah D'oraisa has a set time to it. Now, you can't read that in according to the Rambam, because the Rambam clearly holds that D'Oraisa there is no set time. So, besides the fact that the pasuk in Tehillim, in the Pashtus, is not teaching us a din in Tefillah, it's David HaMelech expressing that he would often daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? Not that this is the chiyuv of Tefillah D'Oraisa is Erev Vokus Harayim. It's David HaMelech saying, I would daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu all the time. So it could be we could make some sort of drasha that no, it's really teaching us that there's three tefillas during the day, but it's not the pashtus of the pasuk. So therefore, I think it would be very difficult to say that if we would have a pasuk, according to the Rambam, that says avodah shebalev, and there's a chiyuv d'oraisa to daven, it would be very difficult for the Gemara to say that that would be time bound because of this pasuk in Tehillim. It doesn't seem to really qualify the mitzvah d'oraisa. And certainly, if tefillah is only a durabanan, so then why they bring the pasuk into Tehillim? Right? It's a takonas chazal. It has nothing to do with the pasuk into Tehillim. So no matter how you look at the Gemara, whether you look at it like the way the Rambam does, that tefillah is a d'oraisa, or whether you look at it like the Ramban, that tefillah is a durabanan, just the seder of the Gemara plus the whole raya of the Gemara seems to be very difficult. The truth is that if you look in the Rif, and the Rif clearly is going, right, according to the state of the Gemara. The Rambam, right, he brings the din and we don't know where they come from. Right, so when he says that women are chayiv because it's a mitzvah seisha ein hazman grama, so it sounds like he's referring to this Mishnah, but he's not going at all with the Gemara. Right, so we have this issue. The Rif, right, goes according to the state of the Gemara. He brings the Mishnayos, and then he explains, usually he brings the parts of the Gemara which are Nogeya. On this Mishnah, he says that women are chayiv in tefillah. He says the reason why women are chayiv in tefillah is because his mitzvah is say she'ein hazman grama. He doesn't say because of rachamim. He doesn't say really it is zman grama because of Tehillim, the pasuk in Tehillim, but it's rachamim. The Rif doesn't say that at all. The Rif says exactly what the Rambam says, and he's saying it clearly on this Mishnah. So, and we know, this is a general fact to always keep in mind, is the Rambam cannot always understands the Gemara like the Rif. Not always. I'm saying obviously the Rambam, was his own thinker and definitely had his own shitas. But the pashtus, if you want to try to understand the Rambam, a quick, easy way of understanding the Rambam is first look at the Rif, and then see the Rambam. The Rambam is generally understanding the Gemara the way the Rif understood. So you see clearly that the Rif seems to be ignoring what it says in the Gemara, and instead says like what the Rambam says. So maybe he had a different girsa. Or maybe he understood the Gemara a little bit differently, because it's very difficult to understand it the way, the Pashtus, the way we understood it. And the Rambam was just following that. And so I don't think that we have, a question specifically on the Rambam from this Gemara. The Gemara is very difficult to understand. I can't really understand it even according to the Ramban. And perhaps there's a different girsa that the Rishonim are going with. So that takes care of the Gemara on Daf Chaf. One more raya for the Ramban, and that's from our last Ma'ar Makom, which is the Gemara in Brachos. It's a Mishnah, actually, in Brachos Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, and it says, No se hamita v'chilufeihem v'chilufei chilufeihem. The people that are carrying a coffin on its way to burial, and they would, switch off many times. Es shalifnei hamita v'es shalachar hamita. There are some people that are in front of the coffin, which is the direction the coffin is moving, so they have not yet carried the aron. And you have people in the back who they maybe had carried the aron before, but they're part of the procession, but they're not going to be carrying the aron anymore. So Eshel Afnei Amita Tzarech Behen, the people in front of the aron are still needed. Peturim, so they're pater from Kriya Shema. That's what we're referring to in this Mishnah, speaking about the din of Kriya Shema. Veshla Achar Amita Tzarech Behen, and the ones that are after the Mita who were needed, but they're not needed anymore, Chayav, and they're Chayav to say Kriya Shema. Ve'ilu b'termin tefillah. But both of them are pater from tefillah. So here again we see a difference between Kriya Shema and tefillah in regards to the people that have already carried the aron and now are walking behind the aron. They do have to say Kriya Shema. Seemingly we would understand because Kriya Shema is d'oraisa, but they would not daven because we would understand that davening is only d'rabanan. And that's the way Rashi explains that Mishnah. Now, you could explain that we're talking about a situation where he already davened that day. And the question over here is just whether he's going to miss out this tefillah. Right, for example, he already davened Arvis and Shachris, and now in the afternoon there's a Levaya. And so the question is, does he stop in the procession? I mean, he stops participating in the procession in order to daven Mincha. That's not a din d'oraisa at all, even according to the Rambam. And therefore, that's why we'd have this difference between Kriya Shema. Obviously, you're talking about Kriya Shema, so we're not talking about Mincha. As we're talking about, say, in Shacharis, but he already davened Arvis. So Kriya Shema, he has a Chiv d'oraisa to say, so that he would have to stop. But for Tefillah, not. That would be one way of answering for the Rambam. And the truth is that there are other ways of explaining this mission also not like Rashi. And then maybe there's other differences between Kriya Shema and Tefillah. The Rabbeinu Yonah, for example, he explains that Kriya Shema is something you could do while you walk, and therefore he doesn't have to leave the procession in order to say Kriya Shema. So therefore, if he's not physically active in carrying the Aron, so therefore there's no steer from him to continue walking behind the Aron, and he could say Kriya Shema as he goes, as opposed to Tefillah, you would have to stop. And therefore Kriya Shema he does have to say, and Tefillah he doesn't. And therefore it wouldn't get into this whole discussion of whether Kriya Shema is d'oraisa or d'Rabbanan. Another point that the Shagged brings up is something interesting that the Ramban says. It's clear from the Rambam that when you have a chiyuv to daven d'oraisa, that chiyuv is once a day. Every day there is a chiyuv to daven once a day. There's no specific time during the day, but every day you have to daven. It's clear from the Rambam. Rambam said, right, l'spalel b'chol yom. Every day he has to daven. Now the Ramban, as part of his questions against the Ramban, when he questions the Rambam, so one of his questions is, he says, if the chiyuv d'oraisa isn't every day, there's no set time to daven, and I don't have to daven every day, so then when do I have to daven? Right? Once a week, once a month, once a year, once a lifetime? What is the chiyuv? If it's not defined to any specific time, so then what is the chiyuv? It seems like the Ramban is asking this on the Rambam, and therefore the Sefer Megillas Esther, which is a Sefer written on the Sefer Mitzvahs of the Ramban, which we actually quoted in the Shemitah Shir last week. So he asks on the Ramban that it's very difficult what he's asking, because the Rambam clearly says that you have to daven every day. Right? This is not a question against the Rambam. So how do we understand the Ramban? So the Shagged points out is that the Ramban is not asking now against the Rambam. What he's doing is he's like setting up a proof to his shita that the whole chiyuv is only d'Rabbanan. First, he brings all of these questions against the Rambam, right? That we see from all these cases that tefillah is only a d'Rabbanan, not a d'oraisa. And then he goes on to say, and if you would say, not like the Rambam, and you would say that really there is no chiyuv every day d'oraisa, it's a undefined chiyuv, right? If you would say such a thing, and if you would say that, you would be able to answer up many of the questions that he asked from the Gemara against the Rambam. He's saying if you would say that, then you would still have an issue, because it can't be that there's an undefined amount of time to daven, right? It's not every day, but it's when. It just doesn't make any sense. If it's not every day, so when is it? Once a week, once a month, once a year. It ends up being you don't really have a chiyuv if you don't have to daven every day. That's a question that the Ramban is, or it's not a question, the Ramban is taking that out of the equation in order so that all of these Gemaras will be a clear proof that it's only d'Rabbanan, and that there's no d'oraisa. But it's not directly attacking the Rambam, because the Rambam clearly holds that tefillah is once a day d'oraisa. Okay, one last question. I'm not sure why this didn't make it to the Mara Mokum sheet, because it's a Gemara, lengthy Gemara that we're going to quote, but it's not too complex, so we'll be able to hear it outside. It's a question against the Rambam. The Rambam holds that tefillah can be done once a day, and it's clear from the Rambam, and it's even more clear in the Sefer HaChinuch, that it doesn't make a difference whether it's done at day or at night. Right? That one tefillah you do during the day doesn't have to be during the daytime. It could be also at night. Just during that 24-hour period, which we call a day, you have to daven one time. He said, if so then it should be listed in the Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in Megillah, Daf Chaf Amud Beis, which lists the things which are kosher to do during the day, the mitzvahs that are kosher during the day, and the mitzvahs that are kosher to do at night. And it says over there at the end, Zeh HaKlal, the rule is, Davar she'misvasu b'yom, kosher kol hayom. Davar she'misvasu b'layla, kosher kol halayla. At least on a d'oraisa level, if there's a daytime mitzvah, you can do it all day. If there's a nighttime mitzvah, you can do it all night. It's not set to a specific time during the day or the night. The Mishnah should have also given a third klal, which is, mitzvahs which can be done day or night can be done anytime during the day or night. And that would be tefillah. Right? Tefillah, according to the Rambam, is a mitzvah that could be done day or night. And then once it's day or night, you have the entire day and the entire night to do it. Or the entire night and the entire day. Now there are many mitzvahs, says the Shagas Aryeh, which don't appear in that Mishnah, but we wouldn't be bothered by them. He says, for example, tzitzis and tefillin, which are done only during the day, is not mentioned in the Mishnah. Right? That tzitzis, let's say, is a mitzvah which is a daytime mitzvah, and you could do it, the whole day is kosher to do tzitzis. Or tefillin is a daytime mitzvah, and the whole day is kosher to do tefillin. The Mishnah doesn't mention that. How come the Mishnah wouldn't mention those mitzvahs? And what about sukkah? Sukkah is a mitzvah that's done day or night. And it should have also said there, right, that we have a case of a day or night mitzvah which can be done the entire day and the entire night. So he explains that the Mishnah is only talking about types of mitzvahs that you do once, and then you're finished. Right? The examples that the Mishnah gives, Kriyas Megillah, Kriyas Halal, Tkiyas Shofar, and Tkiyas Lulav, Kriyas HaMusafim. There's a whole list of things. These are things which are done once, and you have the entire day to do it. And the Shagas Aryeh says that's what the lashon of the Mishnah is when it says, Mitzvasu b'yom kosher kol yom. The whole day is kosher. What does that mean, the whole day is kosher? It means I don't have to do it now, because I could do it later. That's what it means, kosher kol yom. I don't have to do it now. I could do it later. That doesn't apply to a mitzvah that applies always, like tzitzis. I can't say tzitzis, I could do the whole day. I have the whole day to do tzitzis. I don't have to do it now. I could do it later. There's no now or later by tzitzis. If you're wearing the Daled Kanfos, and it's during the day, according to that sheet, that only applies during the day, then you have to wear tzitzis. I can't say, I'm going to do it later in the day. Therefore, it doesn't fit into this Mishnah. But what would fit into this Mishnah is tefillah. Tefillah would fit, because according to the Rambam, you could do it once, and then that's it. You're Yotzi for the whole day. And you could do it any time during the day. So the Mishnah perhaps should have listed it. So the Shagas Aryeh says it's not a question against the Rambam, because the Mishnah doesn't necessarily list every single mitzvah. And I think we mentioned this also by the mitzvah of Zechir Siyas Mitzrayim. We brought up this Mishnah. Zechir Siyas Mitzrayim is also a mitzvah that we explained. I think the way the Shagas Aryeh ended up understanding is there's two mitzvahs: the mitzvah of the day and the mitzvah of the night. The day mitzvah is all day. The night mitzvah is all night. It's not mentioned in the Mishnah, even though it's a mitzvah you do once during the day, and you have the whole day to do it. Or the one at night, you do it once during the night, and you have the whole night to do it. It's not mentioned in the Mishnah. Why not? So over there, the Shagas Aryeh explains the same way that is going to explain now, which is, even though there are many things in the Mishnah which are not a chiddush, but there are many things which are left out because they are not a chiddush. As if it's not something that I would have thought otherwise, so the Mishnah doesn't have to tell us. Right, so therefore, davening according to the Rambam, which is once during the day, we would have no havamina that it has to be at any specific time during the day or night. And therefore, the Mishnah doesn't have to tell us that din. And he says especially the Zeh HaKlal is at the end. The Zeh HaKlal, Davar she'misvasu yom kosher kol yom, Davar she'misvasu kol hayla kosher kol hayla. We discussed this in length in one of the previous years. I can't remember which one, but you can go look it up. Listen to it again if you want to listen to everything we said over there. Those specific parts of the Mishnah are coming to teach us a chiddush. Something that's maybe a machlokus and is trying to teach us like one shita. We had the machlokus of Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Elazar and Azariah, the machlokus of Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim, Ayin Sham. But the idea is that tefillah, there are no two shitas. There is no havamina that, according to the shita d'oraisa, that there would be any specific time during the day you'd have to do it. And therefore, the Mishnah doesn't have to mention it. Therefore, this Mishnah also from Megillah would not be a question against the Rambam. So, just to recap, we had the two famous shitas. The Rambam holds that there is a mitzvah d'oraisa to daven. The Ramban holds that there's not a mitzvah d'oraisa to daven. We brought a slew of proofs for the shita of the Ramban, many of which the Shagas Aryeh was able to explain also according to the shita of the Rambam, however many not. And therefore, the Shagas Aryeh maintains that the halacha would follow the shita of the Ramban, right? As he did prove from many of the sources that we saw that the chiyuv of tefillah is only d'Rabbanan and there's no mitzvah d'Oraisa. Okay, that will be it for this shir.